I believe the board has a critical role to play, because don't forget, the board is the thinker, the management is the doer. And the board has to have strategic direction during this critical stage. During this critical stage, there are two crises. One crisis is the pandemic, the other crisis is the economy. And so I've coined the word corona-nomics to show that one is dealing with both crises. And a board in placing strategic direction for the company in this corona-nomics, a sea of corona-nomics in which companies small and large are swimming, has to change its mindset. And that mindset is, first of all, an integrated thinking one, which we know from before, and value creation for society, not just profit at any cost. So the board has to understand and learn of the needs, interests, and expectations of all its stakeholders. But not only that, it now has to learn, because of this corona-nomics, it has to learn of the hardships and tribulations suffered by its stakeholders. And the mindset of the board has to change. The mindset of the board has to be one of integrated, collaborative, compromising mindset, because the company needs to compromise with all its stakeholders and the stakeholders with the company to try and ensure the company survives during this period of crises. Because if the company survives, you've got the nucleus of an infrastructure and your human capital. If the company is liquidated, the infrastructure would be disposed of at a knockdown price in this environment, and human capital will disperse. So when in a year or 18 months' time, when the economy changes again and you have an opportunity to thrive instead of just survive, then it's very difficult to do it if the company has disappeared, been liquidated. But if you have a smaller and you have that nucleus, you can help rebuild and resurrect the economy. So the board, as the strategic director as to how the company operates and what's happening, and compromising with those creditors through management, becomes absolutely critical. I believe that companies' mindset from at least 2010 has already changed tremendously. This pandemic is another driver, and the crises of corona-nomics is the driver which shows that a company has to be seen by civil society to be creating value for society. So it's not profit at any cost as was practiced during the 20th century, when the primacy of the shareholder was the dictate. And one believed increased wealth for shareholders, and that wealth would trickle down to the impoverished at the bottom. It never did. That trickle became treacle and stuck at the top. The company has to be seen to be adding value to society. So the critical issue is, how has the company made its money, or how has it made its product or rendered its service? If it's made its product in a manner which is having a very adverse impact on the environment, for example, looked at holistically, that company is actually destroying value for society. So in that manner, companies have a critical role to play to make sure that they are practicing inclusive capitalism. They're making sure they're adding value for society. If they're not adding value for society, they shouldn't exist. The purpose of reporting is to discharge the duty of accountability. The most informed body of persons in the architecture of the governance of a company is the board, because the board is informed, let's say, 6 times a year about all the elements of what's happening in the company, how the company is making its profit, what are the activities inside the company, what are the risks. And the board is, compared with the board, stakeholders are uninformed. So to discharge that duty of accountability, the basic premise has to be that you have to be understandable. That is why annual financial statements, first of all, are historic. Secondly, have become very complex because of corporate scandals and changes in the corporate world. Standards have changed. They are incomprehensible to 95% of stakeholders. Sustainability reporting has also become very complicated. We now have two standard setters in the world, SASB and GRI. But in that ESG cluster, we also have TCFD, we have CDP, etc., etc. So the whole situation has become very complex. And in order to discharge that duty of accountability, the board needs to take out what is material out of all this information that the framework providers require boards to do, and highlight that which is material, defined as that which is having an impact on the three critical dimensions for value creation, namely the economy, the environment, and society. Well, I think the Sustainable Development Goals are playing a huge role. And we've seen during this period of crises, corona-nomics, that SDG 17 is becoming the critical one. SDG 17, just to remind everyone, is collaboration and cooperation. Without collaboration and cooperation, the other 16 goals, clean cities, clean production, water below the blue line, etc., all these are outcomes-based. And in order to achieve them, one has to think about what are the inputs in a value creation process and what are the outcomes. But they have to think very carefully about collaboration. And collaboration has an aura of transparency about it. And I think one of the, as Churchill said, one must never lose an opportunity arising out of a crisis. And the opportunity which has arisen out of the crises that we're facing now is the first thing we've seen is this global collaboration to try and find a vaccine. And I think there's going to be huge collaboration in trying to resurrect economies. Well, I think the way to coach is to teach that the company is an incapacitated artificial person that has no conscience. The conscience depends on the conscience of its corporate leaders. And therefore, in Sitley, when I teach not only the intelligent quotient, let's say, of an MBA or a post-MBA class, and the emotional quotient, there's also the spiritual quotient. And by spiritual, I don't mean religion. I mean to do the right thing at the right time in adding value for society. And why was the company created? It was created in the middle of the 19th century by society for society. So today we loosely say society is the licensor of the company, but it was created as an instrument to create more jobs, to make society more affable and more livable. And so one of the most important citizens today of any society is the company, the limited liability company. But it's an instrument used for the benefit of society, not for the benefit of any particular stakeholder. And this was the mistake of the 19th going in right through the 20th century, was that primacy of the shareholder, to think that you had to make a decision to increase the wealth of shareholders. And that resulted in the whole of the 20th century being one of unsustainable development and using the natural assets of planet Earth faster than nature was regenerating them. Clearly not sustainable. So today we have to teach our young corporate leaders that they are the conscience of the company, and therefore they must act as conscious corporate leaders. My advice to boards is to, first of all, use every endeavor to get at least 2 millennials on the board, because their thinking is different from my thinking and your thinking. And then millennials today are, say, 42 years old. But there is Generation Z that are 20, 24 years old. They already have undergraduate degrees. And they think completely differently even to the millennials. So I'm advising a lot of companies to establish a Generation Z committee with a non-disclosure agreement and a good faith clause. So the board, stimulated as it is with these millennials on board, still on this decision, let's discuss this and see what ideas comes up from Generation Z committee. And if they ever breach those non-disclosure agreements and good faith clauses, they'll never become a director. So they have this clause hanging over their head, and it is incredible. When you do speak to them, they do give you another light bulb moment, and you put that and you go back to the board. So diversity today, what I'm trying to advise companies is not only racial and gender, et cetera, it's intergenerational diversity, which we need on our boards to get that thinking. And you ask any young person in Generation Z particularly, what are the issues? For them, the biggest issue is climate change. When we get over these crises, climate change is still looming. And all I can say is we cannot social distance from climate change. It will envelop all of us.